everybody. Linda Bloom here.
And Charlie Bloom.
Happy Valentine's Day. I love Valentine's Day, and this Valentine's Day is extra special because today is launch day for our 5th book, and it's An End to Arguing. 101 valuable lessons for all relationships. And a few people have already read it and given us feedback and tell us it is our best book, and we agree. So we're delighted that you're with us today. I am a psychotherapist and couples counselor. My husband and I teach workshops together, and we have been together for 54 years. We just had a 50th wedding anniversary, but I count it all because it was a lot of working it out in those first 4 years. And we're delighted to be here with you today on Valentine's Day for the book launch.
All right. So we're going to just kind of launch into our talk today, which is basically we're going to be addressing some of the questions that people have told us that they have in regard to our book. I guess beginning with the response that we have gotten from many people when we have told them about the book and told them about the title. Is that even possible? Is it even possible to end arguing? I mean, it seems like it's just such a prevalent thing. It happens to everybody, doesn't it? And our answer is yes. It does happen to everyone because we all have differences, and when we get into a relationship, there are bound to be differences. However, one of the things we like to say is that there's a difference between having differences and getting into conflict and getting into arguments, particularly those arguments that can be very destructive, that kind of take you down that rabbit hole where no matter what you do, it not only doesn't help things, but it makes them worse. So yes, it is possible to. However, there isn't one thing that we can tell you will guarantee you that you'll never have another argument. And the book is not about preventing differences from occurring. It's about becoming more skilled in diffusing those differences when they begin to arise.
Our wonderful assistant, Sally Iverson, is here. She's an associate of ours, and she is going to be feeding us questions. She's off camera, but you will hear her voice.
Hello. So I think, Charlie, you started answering the first question. Is there really a solution to end arguing? How?
Well, yeah, there is not, like I said, there isn't one specific thing that everybody can do that will guarantee you that you won't ever get into an argument. But the book really comes up with 101 different aspects of managing and creating and diffusing differences that will, if you take advantage of some of this information, it will make it much more likely. In fact, in many cases, it will prevent those breakdowns from occurring. I would say that the one that is most important is something that we hopefully will get into a little bit later, and that is something called enlightened self-interest. And when one has enlightened self-interest, which is basically the understanding and the trust that what enhances the experience of one person in the relationship enhances the experience of both. That when we do something and give something that is enhancing the other person's well-being, then the relationship itself benefits, and it's a form of insurance against the breakdowns that can occur when that level of trust and goodwill is absent.
Okay. So I think Linda might take this one. What do you do if you try to start a conversation but your partner doesn't want to talk about it?
Well, there are a lot of people who are conflict phobic, and they might refuse to say they'll engage in the conversation. They may actually declare it. I don't want to talk about it. Some people are not that direct. They just change the subject or they walk away. And for those of us who really want to get down to the issue and to process it through, to discuss it through, to learn about what it is going on, to get things off of our chest, we have to be persistent with the people who are reluctant to engage. One thing that is really helpful is timing, not to spring it on them. For years, I didn't know that when I said we need to talk, that struck fear into my beloved's heart and turned him off. When he finally told me that, I found some more effective means to approach him, like, I have something that's really bothering me, and I wonder if this would be a good time. Would you just listen to what it is that's upsetting me? Mm-hmm. And that is a softer approach, and I highly recommend it. At the time, I used to call it introductory remarks. And there's a person in our field named John Gottman who's done a lot of research about successful couples contrasted with the ones who are not successful. His term for it is softened startup, which I think is a magnificent term. And so the timing is important, being respectful about the way we initiate the conversation. And Charlie's already mentioned to you enlightened self-interest. Appeal to them that they're going to be better off in some way. There's going to be better harmony in the relationship, more cooperation. Appeal to them about what's in it for them, because aren't we all motivated by self-interest? But the person who wants to talk about it has more responsibility in setting a context that's inviting, to make sure to put them at ease as much as possible, that you're not going to make demands, that you're not going to issue commands, that you're not going to be blamey and critical and humiliate them and make them bad and wrong. Because that's usually how people got so anger phobic and conflict phobic, is they have trauma in their history that they're not recovered from yet.
Okay, so in that same vein, Charlie, were there certain words or phrases that struck fear into you, or are there certain phrases people should avoid in an argument, and what are a couple of them, maybe?
Well, we don't want people to get too hung up on the semantics of this, because actually the tone of your voice when you're approaching your partner is at least as important as the words that you choose. And what's even more important, or what it is that is going to influence your tone, is going to be the intention that you bring. Mm-hmm. So if you bring an intention to get this other person to do something, or feel something, or say something, or understand something even, that may get you started on the wrong foot. We always encourage people to get clear about their intention before they initiate a conversation in which there's a desire to create a deeper level of trust and understanding. And that is to really be aware of what it is you want to have happen here, and that it should include both people. It's not that, for example, what wouldn't work is to start the conversation with something like, "You need to." We always discourage people from using that phrase, "you need to," because it suggests that you have a problem or there's a deficiency in the way you're operating. It feels like a judgment, and it's going to activate defensiveness. So rather than even using the word "you," which sounds like an accusation when people begin a conversation with that, we encourage them to use the pronoun "we." We have an issue here. We have a problem. There's something that we really, I would like us to address here. So just to be aware that we're all more sensitive to being accused or judged than we realize, including your partner, including yourself. So when we can put it in terms of a shared concern that affects us both, you're much more likely to get a non-defensive, open-minded response from your partner.
So Charlie covered a lot there. Linda, how could one overcome the fear of having these difficult conversations?
Well, if you wait until you don't have any fear to have the conversation, it may be a long wait.
Good luck with that one.
So I'm from the school of thought of feel the fear and go for it anyway. And we define when we teach our classes and we work with the couples that we work with, that fearlessness is not the absence of fear. Fearlessness is being something that's you're committed to that's bigger than the fear. So if you are committed to having an honest, open, connected relationship where both people are in integrity with who they really are, where they speak openly with each other about their needs and their feelings, do you know that they will tell the truth when they're disappointed? So sometimes you have to have a conversation about having a conversation and get a series of agreements in place, because this romantic partnership is the hottest fire. Now, parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, some close friend relationships, family relationships can get really heated too, but we find that the romantic partnership, there's so much riding on it that's when people tend to get triggered and emotionally activated. So you have to be careful about the way you speak to each other and to be very gentle to create the safety and security that's required, but also have the courage to speak honestly and openly about what you feel and need, so that balance of safety and challenge is in sync. Too much safety, the relationship gets stagnant and boring. Too much challenge, it's overheated and can be destructive to the relationship. So you have to keep calibrating. But we always are encouraging people when they have strong emotional reactions to things. Breathe, settle down, try to formulate it into some kind of a constructive request so that you can communicate to your partner in a way in which it doesn't land on them like they feel like they got hit by a truck. That you invite them into a conversation where you learn together. And that is a successful interchange, even if it's a little scary and difficult.
Okay. Charlie, what are the foundational building blocks that you think of for a successful relationship?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important chapters in the book, because we have read and written a few self-help books dealing with relationships. And one of the things that is true about many of them is that while they're very good at giving suggestions about the kinds of behaviors that work and that don't work, and the kinds of things that people can do when they're having difficulties, they don't address what we consider to be one of the most important aspects of that whole process, which is the question about what it is that you do when you know what to do. We hear this from so many people, but for some reason you don't find yourself able to do it. I know I need to be open. I know I need to not be aggressive and attack my partner. I know I need not to be reactive. I know that it's better to be accepting than it is to be judgmental. Why can't I do that? And I think that probably everybody who is listening to us right now has had that experience before. Certainly, we've had it. And one of the things that we've come to understand is that it's one thing to know what works and what you think will be helpful, but it's another thing to actually be able to implement that when you are in the habit and have been in the habit for years or decades of reacting differently. We have reinforced certain behavioral responses to each other and to other people out of habit that are kind of automatic to us, and it feels unfamiliar and uncomfortable, for instance, to get vulnerable when we feel threatened. And yet, it feels counterintuitive, but yet that's what we need to be able to do. So the question is, how do I do that? How do I do what my body seems to be in resistance to doing? And that's where the building blocks come in. The building blocks have to do with developing character strengths that enable you to do things that can break out of some of these patterns. Strengths like the commitment, strengthening your commitment muscle, like courage. And if you don't think that healthy relationships require courage, think again.
And self-discipline, to know when the hell to shut up, when you need to calm yourself down before you speak.
Yeah, yeah. And vulnerability. And how about this one? Patience. Anybody out there ever feel like you maybe could use a little more patience, or that your partner needs to be more patient? So we have a list of about 20 qualities in the book that you can look at to see which ones, if any, and there will be some that you think you could benefit from developing. And we also have suggested practices that enable you to cultivate those strengths and those qualities.
I just want to mention two more because I think they're
Go
so
for it.
important.
Yeah, sure.
Curiosity and humility. We find this all the time when people are so full of knowing that they don't bring their humility. They're arrogant and think they know already. And they don't bring their curiosity and wonder. And if you want to have a fruitful conversation where you learn more about yourself and you learn more about your partner and you learn more about what makes the relationship a big success, you will need the humility and the curiosity on top of the other ones too. They all work in concert with each other.
I want to add one more word, another H word. And this is one that a lot of people are surprised to hear in this list, but it's very important, and it's humor. To be able to have a sense of humor so that you can, instead of being angry at your partner, you can laugh at yourself, or you can do both. But humor is, although it can be used as a diversion from speaking about things that are difficult to talk about, it can also be a way to lighten things up, to be able to address issues that otherwise might feel kind of heavy and oppressive.
And I'm grateful to you for bringing humor, because I tend to be more on the serious side, and you've poked a little fun in a very respectful way, just teasing me a little bit when I get too overwrought about things, and I am deeply grateful for it.
Thank you for that.
In that same vein, in your book, Linda, in your book you mentioned committed listening. Can you tell us kind of what you mean by that?
This has been a strength of mine, and we all have our signature strengths that we bring to the people in our life. And I really am fascinated by people. Relationships, I just think it's the most fascinating game in town. And so when Charlie would speak, I didn't have any problem tuning into him, bringing my empathy, bringing my curiosity and wonder, just listening with my whole being fully present. I know that some people are not as easily geared that way, but when you cultivate this as a practice and you make it a habit, that you really show up, that you don't have any of your screens on, that you don't interrupt and answer the phone, where you make the conversation a very high priority in your life, that you don't let yourself get distracted by other things, and you're really there, you will hear the message that's between the lines. You will get the nuances and the fine points. And so all of the people that we know who have the blue ribbon exemplary relationships, we sometimes call them the Olympic athletes of relationship, they're all black belt listeners. So we recommend this as a skill to cultivate because it will take you a long way in your relationships.
Great. So, Charlie, I know you probably encounter this in your practice, but is it possible to repair trust when it's already been broken, and how might one start doing that?
Well, we know from our experience with many students and clients that we've had, and from our own experience in dealing with trust that has been violated or broken, that it indeed is possible. There isn't any one short method for repairing damaged trust, but the first step in the process is to recognize that there has been a wound in the trust level in our relationship, whether it's from a betrayal, a broken promise, an unkept agreement, whatever it is. And there's no such thing as something that's not important when it comes to trust, because trust is the foundational element of any healthy relationship. Whatever else you have in that relationship, if you don't have trust, it's not going to work. Period. So yes, it is possible. The first step is to acknowledge that there's been a breakdown in trust. The second step is to answer the question that you pose to yourself, which is, do I believe that it's even possible to repair this trust? Because some violations can be so severe that somebody can feel that it's not possible, it's over the top. Also, they might feel like, I don't even want to. I mean, if it's a significant betrayal that has gone on for a long period of time and there's no evidence that this other person has any intention to do anything to repair it, then people can get to the point where I don't even want to bother. It's just not worth it. I'm done. But when there's a willingness to take that step of stepping into the challenge of repairing the trust, there is a possibility that can be healed. And we do talk about that quite a bit in the book, because betrayal and broken trust is something that happens in many relationships. I would say in practically all of them to some degree, whether it's on a low level or a more extreme level.
We have a good question in the chat. What is the best way to tell your partner you're upset? Thank you very much for that question. We sometimes stuff it and we don't tell them, and it just marinates and it turns into resentment. Sometimes we even forget over time what it is that bothered us, but we know that we're not as connected with them as we were. The emotional intimacy, sometimes the sexual intimacy too, takes a drop down, and we just are not feeling as pleased with them as we were. So it's important when we get upset to really name what it is that is bothering us. And when we bring it to their attention, hopefully before we bring it to their attention, there's been an agreement in place that we're not going to stuff, that we're not going to conceal, that we have a commitment to each other, an agreement with each other that we want to be honest and open in a respectful way. And the best way to bring it to your partner is, I feel whatever we feel, sad, disappointed, angry, that's okay, but not act out the anger, because always underneath the anger there's hurt or fear or both. If we can stay with the more vulnerable feelings, we can't guarantee you that your partner will open to what you're saying, but chances are much greater that they can stay open to what you're saying. If you're in your vulnerability, it invites vulnerability. It doesn't guarantee vulnerability. That's why it's so risky and requires the courage to bring up the tough subjects. But if you've had the preliminary conversation that both of you want to have a golden relationship, the only way to do that is to be authentic and real and honest and open with each other. And if you both have that kind of a commitment, then even though it's a little shaky, you're out there on the shaky branches when you broach it, and when they broach something to you, you will have a foundation there in place. It can be the landing pad. Do you know that if you fall off of the tree, you have a softer place to land so you don't get all broken up? And I can't emphasize the importance of having that as a guideline for your relationship. Put it in place as soon as you can.
So, moving on, what factors should you consider when you're conflicted with staying in a relationship or moving on? Are there any deal breakers, Linda?
Yeah, deal breakers are addiction, where the person doesn't want to get treatment for it, when they're in denial. I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not a drug addict, I'm not a gambling addict. Chronic infidelity is a sexual addiction. It's not the addiction itself, it's the refusal to heal from these illnesses. And there can be values differences, that people just really are on such different planes, they're just going in such different directions, that can be a deal breaker too. But a lot of the things that people break relationships up for are not really in the deal breaker category. It's because they haven't developed the qualities that make them eligible for a great relationship, or they haven't gotten the skill set of communication skills, conflict management skills, negotiation skills, repair skills. And so a little slight difficulty can wreck the relationship, and they think that that difficulty that they have is a deal breaker when it really isn't. And one of the findings of the research that breaks my heart is most couples who get divorced don't even have one counseling session. And I believe that some of these families didn't have to fragment if they got good help. And maybe you don't go to get the help you need when you go to the first counselor. Maybe you have to go to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 until you find somebody that helps your breakdown become a breakthrough rather than a breakup. Because a lot of things that people are ending relationships over aren't truly in the deal breaker category.
So, Charlie, how do you go from a relationship breakdown into a breakthrough period?
Well, as I was saying earlier about broken trust, which of course is a form of a breakdown, the first step is to acknowledge it to yourself and to the person with whom you're in a relationship that we got a problem here. You know, this is a legitimate situation that requires attention, and it's important for both people to be able to see that. You know, some people will come to their partner and say, you know, this is a real issue for me, this is a problem, this is a concern. And the other person will say something along the lines of, well, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You know, this is not such a big deal. Get over it. You know, what's your problem? And, you know, that's not a particularly productive way to address a problem. One of the things that we both strongly believe is that if one person feels like there is a problem here that's affecting them and the relationship, then both people have a problem.
And that kind of ties into a question we have here, which is, what is the best way to tell your partner you're upset?
So I want to speak in very strong language about the person who's positioned and obstinate about not wanting to address the upsets, that we need to appeal to them. This is laying very heavy on my heart. This is really upsetting to me. I want to go so far as to acknowledge the person who is deeply and chronically upset about an issue that is not getting handled, that is in the category, from my point of view, of emotional abuse. And you were asking just a moment ago about deal breakers. Emotional abuse can be as ghastly and destructive as physical abuse because it wears down a person's sense of self.
And I just want to underscore one of the pronouns that you used in that example that you just mentioned, and that is that the pronoun that you used was I. I have a problem. This is really difficult for me. This is what I am experiencing. And most of us have heard the idea that it's not productive to use you statements. One of the reasons for that is because when you preface the beginning of a concern to somebody with the word you know, you did this, you shouldn't have said that, you have a problem, it feels like, and it is actually an accusation. An accusation and an attack that is going to cause them to be defensive. The problem with defensiveness isn't just that it's causing the other person to feel bad, but it's that the focus of the attention now is on, in terms of the other person, is on protecting themselves rather than listening to you. We talked about listening, Linda spoke about this earlier. When we're really showing up as a committed listener, the other person feels like their concerns are being attended to. The other person feels safe. They don't feel threatened. When we point the accusing, judging finger of blame and guilt and shame at the other person, we might succeed in getting the focus off of ourselves, which is often our intention, but at the cost of them taking an adversarial defensive position, which makes having an unproductive argument much, much more likely.
And even if we do it well, and even if we stay on our side of the street and we are responsible in our communication, I'm suffering, I'm hurting, I'm not getting my needs met, I need to be heard by you, I want us to be closer. You still may get some pushback. You still may get, they might have a guilt or a shame attack just because they're not being, partner charming. But don't give up too soon. Continue to invite them to look at what's not working. Invite them to see that this could be destructive to the relationship to the point where you could stay together but not happily, or it could break you up. Because some of the issues need hundreds of conversations to get to the place of understanding and some kind of harmony and cooperation. And I think people, they give up too soon about the things that are essential that must be addressed.
So that does tie into the next question for Linda. What if you have these unresolved issues even after you have an argument? How do you finish unfinished business?
You can't finish all business, and some of it takes a lot longer than the mind thinks it should take. We want to emphasize the very real possibilities that some of the issues of the relationship that you come in the beginning, 50 years later, will still be there. It does not mean that you don't have a successful relationship.
Or 54 years later.
Yeah. The research is pretty clear about this, that the differences that couples come into the relationship with in the beginning, decades later, they're still there. They may be a very happy couple because the areas that do work for them, at least 5-1, can offset the place that's a little irritating. But you don't homogenize. You become more of who you are over time. The couples who are successful just have a really big space for it all to peacefully coexist.
Yeah, I think that we're kind of running out of time here, but I do want to thank everybody for being a part of our dialogue, our conversation here, and really want to encourage you to really look at some of the ways in which you can make your relationship more conflict free. You're never going to get rid of the differences. That's part of what gives a relationship the juice that it has. But to really look at how can we enhance the depth of our caring and minimize the distracting, unproductive arguments that we get into that just don't go anywhere.
There's one final question that we'd like to talk about in what do you mean by having a conversation about having a conversation? You mentioned that a lot, and maybe we can go into a little more detail on that.
Well, there's a chapter about that in the book. So I'll give you a very brief, my nutshell answer to that question. The way in which we preface our desire to have communication about a concern is probably as important as anything that we say during that conversation. Mm-hmm. So if we set it up with the other person as a personal need that we have or a desire that we have that will assure them that we're not intending to have them take on any guilt or shame or blame, but we want to collaborate together to see how we can make our relationship even better than it is. It doesn't mean that because I want to talk about something or I have a concern about something that there's anything wrong with either one of us or with the relationship. It just means that I'm aware that there are ways in which we can enhance this. We can focus on how can we make it better as opposed to what's wrong with it and whose fault is it. So the way we present that has everything to do with what the result of that conversation is going to be. Mm-hmm.
There's a wonderful question from John in the chat that I think would be terrific to wrap up with. And he says, isn't it normal to argue in a relationship? And this is a distinction that we want to make. It's normal to have differences. It's normal to have even emotionally heated discussions in a relationship. But all too frequently, that line of having a healthy, productive interchange that can be passionate, full of feeling, goes over the line to argument where one person is trying to coerce the other person into seeing it their way and doing it their way. And that's when you get into the battle of wills. That's when the relationship starts to sink in its well-being rather than being uplifted because people really understand each other and bring, their differing points of view to bear on the relationship where it's enlivened and enhanced by it. So the reason that we wrote the book is we wanted people to speak honestly and openly about what they feel and what they need, and to have good, productive conversations without the hurt and the fear and the diminishment in their well-being that comes when you don't know where those lines are and you transgress them. So thank you very much for the wonderful questions, for your rapt attention, for your interest in the topic. I think that this is a direct path to having excellent relationships and getting up to that blue ribbon status. And I want to tell you that our website has all kind of free things on it. It's www.bloomwork.com. And if you can remember Linda Bloom, Charlie Bloom, or Bloomwork, you can get on our mailing list and you get a booster shot of inspiration with our newsletter once a month. There are over 100 videos on our YouTube channel. There are over 600 blogs on our blog site, and there's some free ebooks that will also be a fine addition to your fulfillment in your relationships. So thank you for being with us. I had a great time.